We'll start with a myth I hear all the time. Don't worry, they'll grow out of it. But will kids really just grow out of difficulties they show when they're young? Before we jump all the way in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to help other people find these important insights. To get started, let's talk about where this idea of kids just growing out of things comes from. It really starts from an outdated belief that children will naturally outgrow developmental or behavioral challenges without any intervention whatsoever. And let me just say, before everybody panics or before everybody just writes in and tells me that kids do outgrow things, yes, they do outgrow some things. There are some things that are developmentally appropriate for a child to face, and those things will most likely just be resolved once the child furthers in their development. As a matter of fact, there's a resource on my website. If you go to badkidsdon'texist.com/resources, there's a document there that says typical versus atypical child development. In that document, I've broken down all these developmental milestones from birth through the teenage years, and it talks about what is typical and what's a typical version of a behavior, and then what is more atypical, what is not expected, and what may constitute a underlying issue, what may be an indicator that there's something more going on than just normal or typical development. So there are some things that will be resolved, and if you go download that resource, you can see some of the things that are most likely just going to be things that kids will grow out of, and then some other things that maybe needs some more professional support. In order to differentiate, let's just talk first about what constitutes a real problem. In mental health, there are three things that we track, and different people have different acronyms for this or different ways to keep track of these things, but there's really three things that we as mental health professionals are looking for. And it's the acronym FIT, F-I. It's the frequency, the intensity, and the time of behaviors. How often something happens, how extreme it is, and how long it lasts. When trying to decide if something is a real problem or just developmentally typical, those three things can be really important and really helpful to think about. Think about the frequency. How often is this thing happening? If it's happening a high level of frequency, if it's happening a lot, especially if it's happening a lot even with intervention, it could be that the child is struggling with something deeper than just the behavior, and some professional intervention is necessary. The second letter, that I, is the intensity. If it is very extreme behavior, if it's very intense, or if it's very dangerous, either to themselves or to other people, it's likely that that behavior is not just a normal typical childhood developmental issue. It does require some professional intervention. And then finally is the T, time. If that behavior is lasting for a extended period of time, if it is going on for hours, maybe it's a tantrum, and instead of just 20 minutes, it's going on for 4 hours and not decreasing in intensity that whole time, it could be something where the child needs more professional support. But many things have been pathologized that don't need to be pathologized. So go check out that document, that typical versus atypical development document, and see how your child's behaviors match up. If you see things that are more frequent, more intense, and last longer than what is listed in that document, it could be the child needs more professional support. And let's say they do meet that criteria, where this is an atypical developmental issue or an atypical behavioral problem. What then? Will children just outgrow those real difficulties? Now that we've distinguished between what is really just typical childhood development and what is atypical with that frequency, intensity, and time, if there is atypical development or atypical behavioral challenges, will a child just outgrow those things? Let's talk first about the long-term impact of not getting some intervention. A study from the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, it's also known as the ECTA Center or the ECTA Center, found that without early intervention with children who are facing these atypical developmental things, they are more likely to experience ongoing developmental delays. So it's not just that they'll be stunted in their development at that period of time, but that development will continue to be stunted even as they physically grow up. Their study also shows that without that early intervention, children are more likely to experience academic difficulties. So they'll fall behind in school more often. If they need intervention and it's not received, then they'll struggle at school. And finally, their study found that not intervening can lead to social emotional issues. I say all that to tell you, really, it affects every part of their life. Mental health is something that someone is living with at all times in all environments. So if they need some help with their mental health and they're not getting it, they don't leave their brain behind when they go to school. They don't leave their brain behind when they're at home. They don't leave their brain behind when they're with their friends. It's that same brain at all times, and not helping when a child needs some help will affect every domain of their life. If you look at this study by the ECTA Center, it's not just that they won't outgrow it, it's likely that these challenges will persist and can even morph into those more serious difficulties later in life. But let me also give you some hope, because sometimes one of the things that holds people back from getting their children intervention is this belief that once their child is in services or once their child starts therapy, that their child is going to need therapy forever and always. But that's not what the research shows either. A study by the Rand Corporation found that early intervention will actually reduce the need for future services. In most cases, if a child is dealing with something with their development and there's atypical development or atypical behavioral concerns and they get some professional help, it's unlikely that they will need services again in the future. That's both a great economic thing as well as a great thing to know that they will have built the skills and caught up so that they won't need those services. So just because a child goes into services does not mean they'll need to be in those services forever. And another study by the Rand Corporation found that early intervention actually improves cognitive and social development and leads to better academic outcomes. Remember all those things we talked about that a child would struggle with if they don't get early intervention? Well, this study by the Rand Corporation shows that with early intervention, all those things are resolved. Really, what I'm saying is you've got nothing to lose. The early intervention is most likely to lead to more positive outcomes as the child develops. If you have a concern, if you feel like your child is showing some things in their development that are just not typical, or they're showing some struggles that are lasting with persistent frequency and high intensity and extended periods of time, don't wait to get some help. Go to badkidsdon'texist.com/resources, download that sheet and see if there are any things that your child is demonstrating that may mean they have an underlying issue that needs some professional help. And then consult with a professional to explore some early intervention options. That will help make sure the problem doesn't grow into more serious concerns later, and it will set your child up for success. If you found this helpful, be sure to like this video and subscribe for even more insights.